My background to this topic began in 1988 when I was studying economics as a grade 11 student at Coorparoo State High School, just a few kilometres away from here. I wrote an assignment on China's economy and was hooked. I then went on to study a Bachelor of Economics at the University of Queensland, where I was at the same time you were there, Lay, actually.
Wow.
You were studying commerce, I was studying economics.
UQ students, this is a real reunion.
I was a pretty ordinary student, to be honest, except for any courses that involved Asia's economic development, and those I just absolutely devoured. I then did a PhD on financial reform in China, and then began an academic career that included setting up the first undergraduate course in Australia on the Chinese economy. That was at UQ in 2006. In 2014, I moved to UTS, and these days I spend just as much time thinking about the Australia-China relationship in terms of geopolitics as I do economics. I think it is really useful for our audience tonight to hear about Peter, Lay, and my background, because our position in significant part determines the touch points we all have with China. Lay, you were just mentioning your experience of being a journalist in China. And as open-minded as I'm sure we all try to be, it is impossible not to be impacted somewhat by those touch points that each of us have. Let me just give you one example. I just returned from China 3 days ago. When I was there, I had the opportunity to spend a decent amount of time with a young woman from a poor rural family in central China, but who was now studying at a university in Shanghai, China's commercial capital. This young woman was delightful. Never has left China, but was utterly curious about the outside world, as well as being whip smart. Well, after having hundreds of those sorts of experiences over the last 30 years that I've been going to China, when I see the Australian public routinely presented, when I see China presented to the Australian public routinely as soldiers marching in unison with some big missiles behind them, at a military parade, well, that's not the China that I first encountered 30 years ago, and it's not the China that I still experience today. But of course, that military capability, as Peter referenced, is real, right? And I'm not suggesting we shouldn't pretend anything otherwise, and it absolutely could be used to threaten Australian interests. And so a national security practitioner, unlike an economist like me, is absolutely right to be focused on it. Still, I guess one of the messages that I want to get across tonight is I would suggest that a bigger part of our national interest involves thinking about and engaging with broader swathes of Chinese society and even the Chinese government that are not the People's Liberation Army. And I'm not suggesting that's the only troubling part of the Chinese government.